Hello and welcome to Captains of Industry. I'm Chris Bishop. I'm here in Dubai. I'm here with a man called Mark Doumba. Now he's an economist, an investment professional, and also an entrepreneur. At some stage, he won the Forbes Africa 30 under 30 list, and he's here with me right now to tell us what's the secret of some of his success. Thank you very much for joining us, Mark. And just give us a quick sketch of what you do in Africa.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. So I'm the CEO of Innovate Capital, which is an investment holding company based in Dubai. We invest in 4 sectors: telecoms, financial services, logistics, and technologies across the continent and across Asia as well.
So you were born and bred in France, and your father was from Gabon in West Africa.
That is correct, yes.
And your mother was from Martinique.
That is right.
In the Caribbean.
Yes.
And your parents had very diverse careers.
Yeah, absolutely. My father was a banker. He was a banker for many years, and then he served in government for the latter part of his career. And my mother worked in interior design in France. And basically, it's an eclectic mix, but I've been able to have parents who are at the same time creative and technical. So I think that mix has really been helpful for me.
But long before you ever considered the investment world, you were also considering a career as a professional tennis player.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I'm a dual citizen of France and Gabon. I grew up in France, as you mentioned, but then I moved at the age of 13 to the United States. I went to a tennis academy called Bollettieri Tennis Academy, which was one of the main playing ground for tennis players, Sharapova, Serena Williams, and so on and so forth. And my dream was to become a professional tennis player. I was 350 in the world in juniors by the time I was 17, and second in singles in under 14. But then life happened, and I chose to turn my attention to school and to my education, because the better you get at sports, the more you realize just how difficult it is to perform at the highest level.
As you were a serious tennis player, you started playing when you were 5.
Yeah, that's right.
How quickly did you rise up the ranks, and what did tennis mean for you?
Yeah, tennis was my life. Tennis was is the reason why I'm here today. Because I think when you're so passionate about something and you really put an effort into it, and you wake up every day at 6:30, 7, you play 3-4 hours a day, and your life revolves around one activity, you really just build a sense of resilience, a passion, and a work ethic that has been fundamental to the life that I've had up to this point.
And it's not as glamorous as people think, though, is it, professional tennis? I mean, a lot of professionals talk about the grind, going around the world tour. Do you think you just weren't ready for it? Yeah,
I think again, the better you play, the more you realize that the level is really competitive, and you have people who just dedicate their life to it. And I think I was one of the fortunate ones who valued school, valued education, probably had different options, and therefore when you diversify your efforts into different things, you're never going to be as successful and impactful in one thing that you choose picking.
Who were some of your contemporaries in those days of tennis playing?
Oh, I mean, definitely Roger Federer. I mean, I've grown up to watching him grow and play, and watching Nadal and Novak Djokovic. We've been experiencing for the past 10, 15 years an era of tennis that has been unprecedented, and I've been just so fortunate, and I think we all have been fortunate to see those type of players just really be on tour.
What did tennis teach you that you took then into business when you decided to go that way?
Yeah, I mean, every day when I was playing at Bollettieri Tennis Academy, we used to practice from 6:30 to 7:30, physical conditioning, 7:30 till 10, tennis. We used to go back to our dorm, shower, get ready. The school bus would pick us up around 11. We'd go to school until about 3. Come back, and then we'd play again from 4 to 6. So that gives you a sense that my day for 4 years straight was really based around tennis. And again, the ethics, the work ethics, the effort, all of those things have really been fundamental in what I've been able to do and maybe achieve to some extent so far.
So from there, you went into the financial world.
That is right.
So how did you take to it? Did you have any regrets at all leaving tennis behind?
Yeah, I had some regrets initially, because it was a really difficult decision to just say that you will abandon something that has driven you for the better part of your life. But at the same time, I'm grateful because I've been able to take what tennis has been able to offer me and the opportunities and the exposure to the world, because as you've mentioned, tennis is a sport that requires you to travel heavily across the world. So I've learned cultures and people and different ideas and thoughts. And then moving into the world of finance was pretty much because my father was a banker, and I understood that for Africa to develop, finance would be a key tool, and I would need to study it, understand it, to hopefully one day being able to make sense out of those studies.
So what was your first job in finance?
Yeah, so I started working as a financial analyst in an investment bank based at the DIFC in Dubai. The work of a financial analyst is to spend a lot of time on Excel and PowerPoint. You know what time you wake up, but you don't know what time you go to bed. Usually around 11 p.m., midnight, you'd come back from work. We were advising investors in the region, in the Gulf, investing in Africa around mining essentially, and working to acquire state-owned assets that were being privatized around 2008, 2009. So it's been amazing to work in investment banking, because at the age of 21, you get to work with business leaders, decision makers, government officials who want to privatize those assets, and you're asked to basically put yourself in their shoes to think about development or business decisions. So,
and that must have been a very interesting time to start. I mean, 2008, 2009, just after the global financial crisis. Must have been very difficult days for you.
Yeah, so when I tell people that I've studied finance, they say, that's amazing, my God, life is set for you. And then you tell them that you're the class that graduated in 2008, and then suddenly they say, oh my goodness, good luck, pal. But no, it was tough, but I think that is why I chose to leave the United States, where I was studying at the time in Washington, D.C., to be based in Dubai, in emerging markets, in growth markets, to basically look into different ways to do investment banking and finance.
But at a time when the world economy was bleeding, what was it like here in Dubai in that time, 2008, 2009?
Wow, it was, so 2008 when I arrived was fine, and then 2009, so there was a bit of a delay, there was latency, it suddenly got really bad. It got quite difficult. You had people leaving their cars in the parking lots. I'm sure you have heard about all of these stories. Dubai was a pretty frenetic place, but at the same time it was a smaller city. There was a community of people. Everybody knew each other. It was quite easy to meet people, access opportunities. So I actually really enjoyed being in Dubai at that time. It was great despite the crisis and despite the difficulties that came with it.
How do you think Dubai rode the global financial crisis compared to other financial markets around the world?
Yeah, it had a tough time. But Dubai is blessed with having good leadership. I think they also had the support of Abu Dhabi, being part of the UAE, who stepped in at some point to help bail out when Dubai was having a tough time. But I think since then, the way they have recovered, the way the real estate market has picked up, and the way all of those different industries have picked up to make Dubai a key destination for tourism, has been just spectacular. So,
what lessons do you think were learned in those difficult times that Dubai is feeling the benefit of now?
Yeah, I think during that time, Dubai took bold steps. The Emirates ID, which is now a key document that everybody must have here, grew out of that. The fact that you had different people taking loans from different banks and taking actions in different institutions, but you had no central file to be able to track and understand what is really happening. So I think Dubai has learned from those experiences and has built a robust system to have more control over society and over the way people interact. And I think Dubai is a really hopeful place. They're very optimistic. They're future oriented. And I think that it's something that we all probably need to sort of look into as other countries face similar crises in their own time.
And so we'll talk more about Africa in the second half, but as an investment springboard into Africa, what kind of shape is Dubai in?
So I think Dubai is an interesting place. I'm often asked, having lived here for many years now, Mark, we're in Africa, we want to raise capital in Dubai. Can you please introduce us to investors? And I would always answer to that Dubai is not so much a place that invests significantly in Africa. I believe that originally people here started as merchants. So the trading activity is more what they do. They like to trade with people, and investments only comes once there is a certain level of comfort with you and this trust is established. So it's a really gradual process. But we think that you can look into Dubai and its investors as an easy place to tap onto capital, I think is misguided.
Okay, so how hard do you have to work to raise capital here?
You have to build relationships. It's really relationship driven, oriented. People need to trust you. They need to like you. And it's only once you've moved into a zone of personal comfort that people then feel that they can trust you, want to then discuss business. And then suddenly doors open. And it's become really nice to be here. And it then becomes really positive.
And in terms of the future, I mean, we're looking at 2020 now, a new decade. How do you think the emerging economies of Africa and the Middle East are going to face this decade?
Yeah, well, you have a few tailwinds and a few headwinds. I think what's really driving Africa's growth is population. Population's been booming. By 2050, you'll have approximately 2.5 billion people in Africa. So that's a lot more consumption. And hopefully, that's a lot more consumption, but we need to match that with a lot more production. And I think this is one of the key drivers that will need to be addressed as we go into this 2020 years. And as far as Dubai goes, Dubai has built tremendous amount of infrastructure, but they are underpopulated. So they're also trying to bring immigration, trying to attract people in order to make more use of those infrastructure. And I think that when you look into those two things, you see a combination where experience that were used to build Dubai in the UAE can definitely be used, but must be adapted to the local context of those different African countries who have different preoccupations and different needs as well.
I mean, there's no doubt at all that the infrastructure gap in Africa is huge, but what it needs is solid, steady stream of finance at the moment. How do you believe that's ever going to be delivered into the continent?
Yeah, so I think there are two things. The first thing is recently you hear a lot of conversations by the IMF and World Bank institutions who say that Africa is too indebted. And on average, you have 50 to 60% of debt GDP levels. And a lot of these countries or institutions rather feel that it's too much debt. But at the same time, infrastructure is financed with debt. It's rarely financed with equity. So I think that we will need to accept that in order to build the infrastructure, we need to allow governments to borrow a bit more, but it's not about borrowing, it's about what do you do with that fresh money that you're using. Historically, it has been not used for the right purposes, but if it actually goes towards infrastructure, then it will help bridge that gap. And then the second thing is public-private partnerships, meaning having governments who have access to concessions and infrastructure, but don't have the capital. But these roads can be productive, and we need to bring more investments in from funds, private equity firms, and so on and so forth.
Just when you're going on investments in Africa, your parents were born and bred in, your mother was from Martinique, but your father was from Gabon.
That's right.
When you go on investment journeys in Africa, are you considered an insider or an outsider?
Yeah, it's a good question, Chris. I think I'm really considered as both. Depending on the environment and the context in which I navigate, my ability to understand culture and to interact with people and to really understand the preoccupations, I think help me relate and help me be accepted as a local Gabonese more specifically, and as an African definitely in different environments. And then at the same time, sometimes I may come up with ideas and solutions that may feel like, oh, like Mark has spent so much time living in Dubai and working in Asia and studying in the United States that he may not necessarily grasp some of the local subtleties locally. But I think that were the case when I first moved to Gabon in 2015, but the more time I've spent in Africa, the more I think that skepticism, I think, has gone away.
And it's but it's quite a difficult one. I mean, I knew a very successful South African businessman who worked on Wall Street for a number of years, and when he came back to work in a bank in South Africa, a lot of people were quite skeptical of him. They were saying, well, he was bringing Wall Street thinking into a South African environment. But do you think those days are going now with the diaspora? Yeah,
I think the diaspora is helping change the way locals perceive Africans who have lived abroad and worked abroad, and our interventions coming in. One thing that is for sure is that historically, one of the reasons why the continent has not grown the way it should have is because we just come and take solutions and ideas that have been successful in different places, and we just expect them to just work right away. But really what we need to, I think, us, the diaspora, do a bit more is come in and listen first to the perspectives, to the preoccupations that are there locally, make sense of it, and then find ways to match that with existing ideas and solutions and ways of doing things, but that first take into account the local preoccupations. I think it's really important. I think we have a duty to help surface perspectives and to just help match it with useful technology, innovations, partners, investments, wherever they happen to be ubiquitous.
Give me an idea of your investments in the African continent. What's the size and scale of it?
Yeah, so I can give you a really practical idea. Right now, we're building a company called CLIKPAY Group. It's a financial technology company. The aim is that at the bottom of the spectrum, you have the mobile money operator.
Which country is that, sorry?
In Gabon.
Gabon.
In Gabon. So at the bottom of the spectrum, you've got the mobile money operators who offer financial services to the mass. And then you've got the traditional banks who offer traditional financial services to the top 10%. But then what's happening, you still have a gap in the middle that needs to be serviced with better technology, with new ways of doing things, with less branches, so less cost, and better user experience for the USSD mobile money users. And this is where we think that we have first looked into the market and the demand. People are happy with mobile money, they're used to it now, but now they also want more out of it. But then you have small countries like Gabon that don't create interest for multinationals to really offer focused and customized solutions. Unless Nigeria needs it, no other small countries gets it. And on the other side, we have brought in technology that will help do this and build that digital bank that we're currently applying for a banking license for.
What do you think diaspora entrepreneurs like yourself, what can you offer Africa in all these projects?
Well, I think we offer dual perspectives or multiple perspectives. Firstly, again, the fact that we understand local preoccupations and that we speak with people, and that having lived there, we understand what it's like to run a business where you have power failures, no sustainable access to electricity, infrastructure gaps, policy regulations that are unstable, legal frameworks that are not always functioning. So we understand the environment, we understand it real well, but at the same time, we understand the way investors think, because we are profit-seeking enterprises, and we understand that our perception of risk is not the same as that of somebody who lives in Dubai or in Asia, for whom coming into Africa is coming into an environment that they just do not know. So we have a role to offer pedagogy, to offer support and insights, and to help bridge the risk perception that actually prevents investments from taking place, when really Africa is a continent that is ripe for opportunities.
What sort of return on investment are you working on when you get projects like the one in Gabon?
It's difficult to measure. I think usually funds will tell you they're looking at 15, 20% of IRR when they're investing in these types of environments that are deemed as risky. I think our approach is that we focus more on how do we spread technology, how do we have an impact on the local community so that there's mass adoption of the things that we invest in, and so that we actually have this impact on the ecosystem that just helps create jobs and that just helps improve the way policies are being shaped in these environments. So we have a lot more of a macro view of how to impact, and I would probably say, if you allow me, that when Africans go and invest in Africa, we're not just looking at returns, we're really looking at the social returns and at how we can have an impact on the environment.
And but there are a lot of hurdles to be overcome. I mean, just give me an idea of this project in Gabon. I mean, what sort of things did you have to overcome? What stories do you have?
Yeah, I have specific stories. Firstly, whenever you have a business plan in Africa that says that you will start generating your first cash flow in March, I think you need to add 6 to 12 months to that, because the time it takes to really get all of the approvals and to build the ecosystem around these things is significant. Secondly, ecosystem is the thing. Often you want to start something, but you realize that the environment is not necessarily ready in itself to support what it is that you're trying to introduce. So you really have to vertically integrate, bring a lot of the pieces of the puzzle for that one original idea to really take shape. So I think that when we've been applying for the banking license, for example, we have a banking partner who initially told us this is the step, and then we had to actually redo it from scratch, so we lost a bit of time. Hiring is not easy in the technology and innovation sector because people don't often have experience in innovation and technology. So you hire people that you must train, and that's not a setback, it's also an opportunity because you help shape them, but it's just to say that you do not find readily available human resources whenever you try to venture into something like innovation. And it's definitely something that I've come across as we've been building CLIKPAY Group.
And what about the regulators and the authorities? What kind of reception are you getting from them, not just in Gabon, but in Africa?
Yeah. So, for example, when you try to build a digital bank or you try to build a startup, and you look at regulations, you realize that the regulations are so stringent. There are so many obstacles, barriers, documentation, things that you must provide and that you need to overcome in order to start. And what that does, it creates a divide between those who already have or have access to and who are therefore able to overcome those obstacles. And then the remaining 95% for whom overcoming these obstacles is just really difficult. To get a banking license in Central Africa, as we've been trying to do now for some time, is not easy if you don't have access to resources, if you don't have the capital to sustain your activity while you get it. And I think that if regulators could just, while I understand their preoccupation that they want to regulate and manage risk, they also need to make it easier for business to take place.
But some ministers across the continent, and I've heard it many times in many countries, they say, oh yeah, we want this, but we don't want a free-for-all. We don't want to just allow people just to come and do things willy-nilly. What do you say to that as an investor in Africa?
Yeah, I agree. But then at the same time, I'm skeptical about this approach because when you look at the fact that companies like Facebook and Twitter and the social media companies based in Silicon Valley operate freely in Africa, and they do not have much physical presence. They don't have to comply to much of the regulations because somehow they've been able to circumvent them. But then if you try to set up the same activity locally, you're not asked to have a local server, to have an IT security officer, to comply to X and Y, Z regulation that your competitor does not necessarily comply to. And I think that we really need to find a way to harmonize regulations so that it's fair for everyone. And I wouldn't even say fair for everyone. I would say that fair means giving an advantage to the locals in their home environment. And currently, I'm not sure that this is the case.
What are your hopes for this African continental free trade area, that there might be an aligning of regulation across the economies of Africa?
Yeah, I think it's an important reform. I think that it will help create a single market. It will help make sense to build industries and manufacturing because right now, again, I look at Gabon, if you have 2 million people, it does not make sense to have an industrial strategy because for 2 million people, you don't have sufficient scale to produce and to make sense of your cost structure. But if you have a country like Nigeria that has 200 million people that can produce for the masses, but now you're giving them access to another 100 millions, then suddenly the size of factories will become bigger, the technologies being used will become more efficient, and trade across countries will start really happening, and that will just basically help create more jobs, and it will create this whole more productive environment. So I'm totally all for it, and I encourage.
As you probably know, Nigeria is one of the countries who are balking at the idea of the African continental free trade area. They're saying that they're afraid that their economy will be flooded by other economies. Do you think that holds any credence?
Yeah, I understand their concern, but I don't think they should think like that because again, when you have the scale and when you have companies like Dangote who have been able to create cement for Nigerians and for Africans, I think they should not be afraid of their competitive advantages. They should not be, and they should trust their people. They should trust in Nigerians' ability to be competitive. And I think that it surprises me that some of the government leaders have this protective approach. But at the same time, I understand that they are afraid that a Chinese company might just be based in Chad, for example, or in Congo, and just basically export to Nigeria and compete with their local domestic manufacturing sector. So I understand that concern.
And last but not least, in the intro, I mentioned that in 2016, you were named as a 30 under 30 by Forbes Africa, our sister publication. How did that change your life?
Wow. So firstly, I'm grateful that Forbes thought that I was, that I could be shortlisted in such a list. It's really an honor. I've really tried to take that as a responsibility and not as an honor. It's not an award. It's a responsibility to do good, to do better, to work harder, to give access to the resources that you're able to accumulate to those who don't have it. And I think that it's given me a platform, just like being here today with you, Chris, to really share my experiences, share the struggles, and not just the positive aspects of entrepreneurship. So Forbes Africa has been really relevant in the way I've projected myself and probably in the way I dream about the future.
Thank you very much indeed. That's Mark Doumba, the founder and managing director of Innovate Capital, based here in Dubai, but with business interests across Africa. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for on this edition of Captains of Industry. From me, Chris Bishop, here in Dubai, it's goodbye.